I'll just say a few words about Opal. She was born and raised in Jamaica. She's a writer, poet, storyteller, literary critic, radio show host. She had a public radio show on public radio. And she's an award-winning author. Her books have, one of her awards was from the PEN Oakland. PEN is the International Writers Group, really very prestigious group. And she's currently professor of literature at California College of Arts and Science of Arts. She's going to talk today about writing, about some of the writing she's done. She just finished a book, she was telling me, specifically on writing. So I think she'll talk some about that. So if you'd welcome Opal Palmer Adisa. She's just back from Brazil today.
Actually, I'm still in Brazil. I'm trying to get my head here. In fact, what brought me here this morning, I was playing Margarita, who's one of the Brazilian musicians. So I was just like in my car, still sambaing all the way here. Good morning, or is it, yeah, still good morning. How is everybody?
Good.
All right, so people are interested in writing. You know, I was thinking about this last night in my stupor of trying to still be back in California about what it is I want to say and what has my writing life has been. And as Doug said, I have a book which I thought I would have been able to bring because it should have been out the 8th. Now my publisher says the 15th, which is called Eros Muse, which is all about writing. It's essays and poems that I've written about writing, writing as my lover, personifying my muse as a lover, writing as, and being a mother and being a teacher, teaching writing. So that will be out in another week, and I invite you to look for that. And I have like several places I wanted to start with this whole thing. There are 2 pieces I'm going to be reading excerpts from, which actually are not published and are in progress. So that will give you a sense of what it means to have a piece that is in progress. I actually took both of these pieces with me to Brazil, saying I was going to work on them because I was there for 3 months and I worked on other stuff and I didn't even look at them. So I'm going to be reading from 2 pieces. The first piece is called The Echo of Words, and that title will probably remain the same when it gets published. And the other piece, actually, I was invited to write and didn't finish writing it or submitting it. It's called Creating Memorable Characters. And for those of you who are fiction writers, for those of you who are interested in short stories or the novel, then this piece might be particularly of interest to you. So I think I want to start with this piece, The Echo of Words, just the first paragraph, and then I might read a couple other sections from it as I begin to frame my talk. Words are like saliva in my tongue. Without moisture, I cannot talk. Without writing, I cannot live, at least not in any meaningful way. I write out of love, a need deeper than the bluest ocean, a need connected to my marrow, surging through my blood, pumping life from my heart, streaming down the Rio Crobry, misting the Blue Mountain, snaking its way through Fern Gully and flowing down Dunn's River Falls. I am my land, the people whose bodies sheltered and nourished me to life. I am their stories. Their tales ring in my ears, calling to me at every turn, saying, is my time now? Is my time? Is Fiwi time? What you waiting on? Why you not telling them about we? Why you playing the fool? Sit down, child, sit down and write me now. Write we. And I think that's a good way for me to begin to talk about writing. Because, as Doug said, I grew up in Jamaica, and I grew up during colonial time. I'm telling my age. So Jamaica was still a colony of Britain, and as a result of which we got a very good British education. But it was out of the need to see myself and the people around me that were not in any of the books I read that really propelled me to start writing rather secretly when I was 8. And so, this is something that I think is very similar maybe to all writers, but certainly it's very similar to black writers, because I've heard African American writers say the same thing, I've heard African writers say the same thing, and certainly Caribbean writers say the same thing. So the need to write was propelled by the absence or the invisibility of who and what we are. And I think that's true for me too. That, there was this need I was learning about snow and sleet, things that I couldn't even imagine. And in Jamaica, when it gets to be 75, we say it's cold and you need a jacket. So so I couldn't even. I remember once the teacher gave us all a detention because we were reading this poem about sleet, and she says, "Well, somebody described sleet," and none of us, we thought it was just a word. Nobody looked it up. We didn't know what it was, and she was like, "My goodness, you girls don't know what sleet is." Well, hey. Didn't know, couldn't imagine it. The first time I saw snow when I was almost 17, it was like, I couldn't imagine it, even though I was seeing it and even though I'd seen it. So writing came out of that. But more than that, I think, is that I was always fascinated, and still am, by words. That there is a way in which words and language clothe me that nothing else does. There's a way in which my ability to string words together, to create an image, to impregnate an idea, to impress upon people a place or a thing. There's nothing that feels that good. Nothing. So it is born out of that need. Now, I'm moving all over the place, which is what I'm doing. So I want to read this piece, which goes into why I write, okay? And it's called No Word for This. And one of the things that I think a writer struggles with oftentimes is trying to find the right language. That many of us have ideas and even good stories. In fact, there are very few people I meet who don't have a good story. But most people, unfortunately, will not spend the time to make the story good. So it doesn't matter if you have a good story. There's one thing in telling it, the orality. The telling of the story verbally is one thing. The writing of the story that makes it incredible is a whole different ball game. And in fact, oftentimes I have found, and which is what I say to my students, when my students come to my class, I said, okay, here's what you need to know. Your imagination needs to be on 365 degrees all the time, okay? Fabrication should become your best friend. You've got to fabricate. No matter how real it is, in the writing of it, you're fabricating. Okay? And then you have to be willing to dispense of what you know as reality. So sometimes, a lot of times what I find when writers come in, and this is for creative writing now, they come in and they say, well, I want to write a story and this is how it happened. And I said, okay. How it happens is unimportant to me. What I'm interested in is how you can tell the story so that somebody can experience it. And oftentimes I find that how it happens is not necessarily the most effective way to tell it. You have to be willing to change things up. And the thing about that is, the whole notion of fiction and nonfiction, once you write it, it becomes true. You hear about tall tales. But, okay, I write about my life. My sister and I lived in the same house for 20 years, right? And we experienced things very differently. Same memories. You guys have the same experience with siblings or friends. Because we all have selective memory. So the truth is selective. You, the writer, your job is to draw people into your world. Is to let them believe fully and become invested in what you're writing. That's why you could sit privately, or 100 different people, or 1,000 different people, or 1,000,000 different people could sit privately with one of my stories or one of anybody's stories, and it causes them to cry regardless of the cultural difference, right? It causes them to laugh. I mean, haven't you read a book and you're laughing and everybody's thinking, what's going on with you? Or you cry, or you read about somebody who's as far removed from you as you can think, and yet you feel an affinity and an identification with that person. Well, that writer that writer had to be very, on one level, conscious and unconscious, manipulating words and the story to pull you in. This piece is from my now old collection, Caribbean writer, and it's called No Word for This. Because one of the things that I'm often grappling with is what are the right words? Or sometimes it's just what is the right word? And so this is the whole thing with a writer is what is the language or the word in which to express and convey the fullness of this feeling or this emotion or this situation. Yesterday, endless fields enveloped me. Cane on one side, banana on the other. Days stretched, no ending in sight. Today, cars and sirens, meetings and appointments, and neighbors pressed in close define my life. Did I dream the red rooster with a fat neck that cackled every morning? I am certain sunflowers grew by my bedroom window, and my mother left my father before I was 4 years old. Tomorrow is a language I am learning to speak. And so one of the tasks is that you're always trying to find this language to speak. Oftentimes people say to me, what is it that influenced my writing, or what is it that motivates me? And I want to talk a little bit about the whole notion of a muse and inspiration, and how those things can be killer for a writer, that one has to be their own muse and their own inspiration. But in terms of my own writing, I say this, often it is nature that awakens the spirit, the writing spirit in me. Some aspect of nature takes me outside of myself to see and be witness to a larger truth, to welcome characters, people I have never met into my life. Sometimes my eyes are arrested by a butterfly flitting in my garden, or a dog sitting under a tree, tongue hanging. Sometimes it is a lizard belly-bound crawling under barbed wire fence, orange flame tongue extended like lightning to catch a fly. Other times it is just the rays of the sun tossing my arm, toasting my arms, or it is the way the breeze rustles the trees, or the movements of the clouds shifting shape into something I'm yet unable to define, or the chirping of birds, and sometimes it is just sitting still, being open to life, hearing a voice or seeing things, and knowing that something that I didn't know until I know it in that moment. I want to say that again. And sometimes it is just sitting still, being open to life, hearing a voice or seeing things, and knowing something that I didn't know until I know it in that moment. Oftentimes it is just allowing life to come to me, to be willing to be a vehicle, another eye, a gong from the past, a rumble announcing the future. So, the challenge of being a productive writer is sitting still. It is when there's a lovely day and friends are calling, foregoing the friends and the lovely day to sit with the words and the ideas. Because the irony about writing is in that we're writing to share with the public, but it comes to us in private. You know, it's a very private endeavor. It is something you do on your own. I don't think, certainly for me, I can't wrestle with words in company. I need to have this space and this time to write. And oftentimes I don't know what I need to write. So one of the things that you also have to dispense with is knowing what it is you're writing. Because in the writing of it, you'll know it. And by the time you've gone through the third or the fourth or the fifth drafts, and you do need those many drafts, you will know what it is you're writing about, and it will be the exact thing that you need to write. So for instance, I was in Brazil, I got a grant, and I was there to supposedly work on this new novel, which is called Yemanja, and I thought I had it all out. You know, there was going to be this female protagonist who's related to the Orishas of the Yoruba, and Yemanja is a big festival in Brazil, and I was going to go to the festival, and I was going to dream this character. I didn't think I was going there to write about a man who was a fisherman, but I certainly have about 75 pages about this man who is a fisherman. And yet, as I am writing this novel, I'm realizing that it is in fact the story that I want to tell, not in the way that I perceived that I wanted to tell it, but I allowed myself to be open, and I didn't say, well, this is where I want to go, when I was obviously being steered somewhere else. So one of the things that I have learned about writing is that not so much to go with the flow, you know, that's that kind of cliche in a phrase, but in a sense it is to go with the flow. It is that you have ideas and there's certain things you want to write about, and when you sit down to write, if it's taking you somewhere else, that is exactly what it is you need to write. You, the writer, have to trust that that is going to lead you to where you want to go, and whatever difficulties you encounter, you will find a way to solve it. So, I've gone Mickey Mouse fishing. You go out, no big fishing. I certainly haven't gone fishing on a sea. Okay? So here it is. I'm writing about a fisherman who's fishing on a sea, and I have no idea. I have no idea what they call those kinds of fish in Brazil. So I had to go and interview fishermen, which I got to do. And one even took me out on a boat fishing, and I realized this was much harder than I thought. I don't think I want to be a fisherman. So one of the things you, the writer, have to also do, and what the writing forces you to do, is to do research, is to investigate. Because you'll find you're writing about a lot of things that you know on a surface level, but if you're going to really develop it, whether in fiction or nonfiction, then you are going to have to research it. And that's one of the things many writers are also good researchers, because they're basic things, some basic things, and some other things that are not so basic that you have to research. So it's, what is a story you want to tell? And then what kind of environment or what kinds of things stimulate your writing? That really is your muse. So for me, I say it's nature. So if I am stuck, or if I'm, it's not flowing, I don't force it. I go for a walk, or I sit on my patio, and I allow nature, to kind of let me be, and to let the story or whatever it is I'm writing. Now, I write fiction, I write poetry, I write essays. I mean, I'm one of these writers who dabble in all of the genres. So what I'm saying to you, that even when I'm writing a piece of creative nonfiction or an essay, it's a similar process. The process isn't any different than writing a creative piece, than writing a piece of prose or working on my novel. It is the same process. Being still, allowing it to flow, allowing it to take me where I didn't think it was going to take me, try to figure out what it is I'm trying to say, and then to give it shape. Let me read another section here. Oftentimes people say to me, writer's block, and we'll talk about that, and I'm sure people will have questions about that. And one of the things I say to my graduate students is that it's I don't know what that is. It's a misnomer, it doesn't exist. It's like everything else. There are times, if you look at, again, and I must, if you look at nature, then everything has a season or a time. I plant seeds, and then later on in the year, I'm going to have tomato trees, and then by the summer, I'm going to have so many tomatoes, I'm going to have to share them with my neighbors. Now, if you look at writing as a similar kind of process, you could plant the seeds and nothing happens. You think, oh God, nothing is happening. I'm having a writer's block. I have no thought. I'm, constipated, whatever. But you kind of trust the process. You kind of trust the process, and you say, okay, there is water, there is sun. Something is going to sprout. Now, some of them doesn't always. You start a story or you start a poem, and it's not good. Out of 100 poems, you're lucky if you have 50 good ones. But you need those hundreds to get to the 50 good ones. You need 500 good pages of a novel to get to 350. So that some of it isn't going to grow. All of the seeds you plant don't grow. But chances are, if everything else be, then they're going to grow. And writing is a similar kind of process. I write when the writing is good. By that I mean I write all the time, but not always at my computer. I write first in my head, weaving and unraveling the story until, like a sweet guava, it is ripe and the skin has turned a slight yellow, and it is no longer hard, firm, but malleable, ready to be picked, ready to be bitten into, teeth plowing through the outer skin, chewing it with the fleshy red meat and seeds contained within. As a cultural worker, mother, teacher, etc., I don't have enough time to write uninterrupted. There are countless streams of stories floating in my head at any given time. So many incomplete manuscripts of poems, stories, ideas that never get beyond the first draft or even the initial idea. I write whenever I can skim off a little time. Sometime that might be 4:30 a.m. in the early morning, while my house is still asleep, before the sun has broken its way through the California fog, before the demands for survival tear my attention and time. I write shut in my office with its gray-blue walls and shelves of books and colorful images. I write. Other times it is 10 p.m. moving straight from the demands of the day into the creative mood while the house still buzzes and tiredness has been shoved aside like a worn and comfortable slippers. I write, and when luxury paints the way, I write about 10 a.m. in the morning while the children are at school and there are no classes to teach, no papers to grade, or I have abandoned everything but the words. The writing is never hard, although it is not always easy. By that I mean sometimes it hides from me like a child playing hide and seek, and I have to go and find it. Sometimes, like a kite, it is like a kite stuck in a tree, and I have to be careful how I tug to disengage it before I can set it free, sailing high and proud. My writing doesn't want to be confined within the grammatical, and perhaps I shouldn't say this for those of you who are in composition, grammatical limits of a sentence. It does not believe in the hard boundaries of the tenses. It makes no distinction between the various realities of being, nor does it privilege one worldview above another. My writing is a runaway, running for itself, to itself, running with the freedom to be, running because it can, and the desire that flows from within. My writing is writing me into knowing and being more receptive to the wide, immense world. My writing is its own world. I want to switch in a little bit to talk about characters, because that's the thing I've been working more on. But what I want to say is that anyone can be taught to write. By that I mean you can be taught to write a sentence, a paragraph that's, grammatically correct, that conveys something. What you cannot be taught is passion. What you cannot be taught is ideas. What you cannot be taught is having something to write about. And I think those of us who are writers, that's what we bring to the table. We bring to the table ideas. We bring to the table hunger. And it's, I was thinking too as I was coming down here, it's somewhat narcissistic, because here you have the nerve to sit in your little space and to do your writing, and then to think somebody's going to want to read it, and God forbid, buy it and keep it on their shelves. It's a bit narcissistic kind of stuff, a little arrogant. But certainly that's what I think all artists bring to the table, and that's what writers bring to the table, is there is something you feel compelled to share. There are some ideas, some notion, some character that you feel moved to share with the world, that you think there is something there of merit, that what you have to say is sufficiently important for others to read. And you have to get comfortable with that. And I think if so that's the first thing. One is having something to say. Nobody can give you that. Nobody can teach you that. You have to have something to say. And I have to say this because I teach graduate fiction. And I have had one or two students who were good writers but had nothing to say, and I told them they should find something else to do. Serious. Because now we have all of these MFA programs, and so we're spewing out writers like we spew out everything else, but not everybody has something to say. And so you have to figure out what it is you have to say, and then why is it you want to say it? Why is that so compelling? So let me talk now a little practicality, because I did somewhat here. All of you are familiar with needing a room of one's own. And many of us have a room of one's own to write, and some of us don't. I don't necessarily think that one needs a room of one's own, but it helps. If you want to write, then what you must do is write. Writing is a craft as well as an art. And I believe the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the easier it becomes. But that doesn't happen just in isolation. It means that you're also reading. You're reading other writers, a variety of other writers, poets, whatever. And you're reading in a much more discerning and critical manner than when you just read before. So for me now, reading is no longer, well, that's not true. There are times when reading still is fun. But I find that I'm always reading with an eye of looking at what the writer is doing. And if the writer isn't doing anything of interest, then one time I used to be compelled to finish a book, no matter how good or bad it is. Now I don't ever be bothered. So you're reading with a very discerning eyes, because not that you want to imitate what anyone else is doing, but you want to get a sense of how other people manipulate language, how other people develop characters, how other people develop plot, what it is about a piece that creates suspense, that creates humor, that creates sadness. So you're practicing your writing all the time, even though a lot of what you write will not be published. You're reading all the time. And then, I talked about imagination, I talked about fabrication. Crucial, number 3, even though this is the order I often present it, number 3 I think is even, well, it's not that there's not a tier, they're all across the board, is eavesdropping. Shall I say that again? As a writer, I think you have to be nosy. I think you have to, and one of the activities I give my students, they have to go to a cafe or some public place, listen and watch some people and write a story about it. There's a wonderful story that's called The Birthday Party by Catherine, it was published in the New York Times a long time ago, I think in the 30s. And it's about a birthday party, and the writer is in a restaurant, and she's observing this couple, and the couple is celebrating their husband's birthday party. And it's a wonderful piece in terms of the power of eavesdropping. Now, you never know when bits and pieces of information you hear are going to come in handy. And you're never going to tell it the way it actually happens, but I can't tell you. When I was teaching at Berkeley, this was in the 80s, I was going home one day after work and was very tired, and just as I was walking to the parking lot, there was this couple fighting in this car. And I stopped to listen. They were arguing, not physically fighting, they were arguing. And I don't remember exactly now what the woman said to the man, but it was such a sharp line, I jotted down. And it was like almost 10 years later where that line became important to me in a story I was writing. So I have a file on my computer, because I do everything on my computer now, including journals when I was in Brazil. I have a file that is called my junk file, where every little bit of information that I found interesting, then I put it in there. I might put it on the dialogue, or I might put it on the setting, or I might put it on the character, because or I might put it on the names, because I'm always having trouble having names for my characters, and I don't want to repeat the names that I've had. All of these little seemingly little things that as a writer you have to begin to organize. So whenever you get information from your observation, from being in the world, whether it's at the bus stop or on the barge or whatever you're doing, driving in your car and there's traffic jam and you glance over and somebody else's window is rolled up, but they're popping their fingers and snapping like I was doing this morning, and you create a story about them. Or you pass and you see someone else and there's a frown, and you immediately begin to make a story about what happened with them or what didn't happen with them. You save all of that information, because all of it will become useful at some point. At least most of it will become useful at some point. So as a writer, you have to be in the world. And you have to be aware and always be observing how people behave. How they walk, how they hold their hands, how they hold their head, how they move their bodies, what their face looks like. Because when you begin to write, particularly in the term of creative writing, and you want descriptions for characters, there's a wonderful poem by Joyce Carol Thomas that's called Shouting, in which she says, her voice accented like sop syrup on biscuits. So to describe a person's voice, like I'm misquoting the poetic line, but it's like sopped syrup, hot, like so a hot biscuit with bread sopped with syrup. That's the sound of someone's voice. That's how she describes this character's voice. And I was just really drawn by that. So I'm always looking for writers who take me out of the regular realm and just give me something else. And it was reading that poem that then forced me, when I was writing about characters, to describe their voices in ways that I would never have described their voices. Just from just from reading that poem. So you're always reading and looking and observing, because all of that becomes a part of your writing, who you are. It becomes who you are, and that becomes important. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this piece of essay that I'm going to finish this year, which is called Creating Memorable Characters. It's almost done. It's in its second draft. And this wasn't the beginning, but I'm thinking now that I want to start here. She doesn't have a name, nor does she need one. No matter, you can't help but see her, not because she's sitting right there on the bench by the pond as you turn the bend in your daily jogging track, but mostly because of her aura. Even when the fog is so thick you can't see your hands in front of your face, you still see her sitting there like a vibrant tree, unmoved, serene, strangely comforting, that you feel compelled to slow, then stop so you can do more than glance at her. You are enticed by her bright eyes, the left one with a miniature butterfly shape on the white, that glow despite the poor visibility, that you stare at her openly, certain that she called your name even though you know you were never introduced to each other, so it's unlikely that she would know your name. She smiles at you and your body is suddenly alight. Your hand hungers to caress her cheeks, arch tinge above its kiwi skin-colored hue. Your fingers itch to trace her lips that curl like lace even though she isn't laughing. Your very breath pants to sniff the air she breathes. She allows you your fantasy as your eyes move to her head, here braided and weaved into intricate designs, and without allowing a word to escape her lips, she nods downward ever so slightly, and you understand the gesture, and it's time for you to continue your running. The character is the writer's calling card to entice her readers into the world of her story in a work of fiction. More often than not, readers' identification with a certain character makes them continue to read to discover the outcome of the tale. The more compelling a character, the more intimate will be readers' connection and association with the character. I will argue, although this might go against postmodern theory, that without compelling or interesting characters, there is no plot, or the plot falls away. Thus it becomes essential that you, the writer, know and delineate your characters very carefully. What do you, the writer, need to know about your characters? Everything, including how she sleeps, what are her fantasies, her fears, and other peculiarities. For example, one of my character's hands are never still, even when she sits and clasps her fingers to keep them immobile. The thumbs compulsively rotate around each other. When she becomes aware of this and tries to hold them still, they move more urgently. Only when she focuses her full attention do they stop for a few seconds, no more than 3, then they begin again, rotating around each other. So here is what I want to say. What details do you need to know about your characters? This is something I've been doing with my students for a while, and so I've decided to write it. And I'm going to give you 20 things that I think helps students develop characters. And when I'm writing, I usually have a chart over my desk. Like now I've started this novel, and the characters change. So now I know the father and I've met the mother. I know the main character and I know his mother and father, so I have their names. I have his age. I have what he likes. He has a girlfriend now, so I know her, and I know I just met her father. And so, you as a writer, you're dealing with all of these people. I'm always dealing with a lot of characters. It just works out that way. I don't know why. So I always have to have a chart, So if my story is taking more than a year, which it often does, I don't know how long this is going to take. So I write, Lorendo, and in the story, he's 36. And so when did his parents have him? I have to figure out how old they are. So then I write his parents' name. And then, I write his girlfriend. His girlfriend doesn't have a mother, but she has a father, or this man who raised her. And then she has friends. And I have to keep that all together, because if you're working on a long work, or even sometimes a short story and you're doing it, it's taking you a couple months, you need to remember who that is. But mostly you have to know the characters. And I've found that if I do this for myself, for my characters, when I'm stuck, or even before I'm stuck, then I can write more about them. So, I invite you to use my 20-point character sketch to help you expose your characters more fully to you and your readers. 1, what is your character's favorite food? Now that might seem silly, or, but people eat. In just about every story, people are eating something. So, what is the favorite food? Everybody has a painful childhood memory that occurred before the age of 10, no matter how ideal their life was. So, what is that painful childhood memory that occurred with that character before the age of 10? 3, what is the character's favorite colors? Again, that helps you to decide what kind of clothes the character is going to be wearing, what colors, kind of stuff. 4, 2 dreams or wishes the characters have, but would not readily share with anyone. So everybody has wishes or dreams. As people say, what do you wish? But I'm talking about things that the character really wants, that they're a little reluctant to share with just anyone. It would have to be someone they really know and trust, like you, the writer. What are these things? And as you're writing this, you're probably saying to me, well, how is this going to help? We're going to talk about that a little later. 5, very important, position in the family. Is it the oldest, middle, youngest, or the only child? That's really important in terms of what your character is going to do and how your character is going to do what he or she does. For instance, I have 3 kids. My son is the middle child between his 2 sisters. He's like his father. He inherited that. My oldest daughter is 5.5 years older than the others. So as an older child, and this is true with my sister, I'm a baby, so I just get to do whatever I want. But as an older child, my daughter had a lot of, had a responsibility. I was always saying to her, take care of your brother and your sister. You know what I mean? So as an older child, there's certain things that character would do, that Shola would do, that my youngest Teju, who is a little spoiled brat, just wouldn't do. She didn't have to take care of anybody but herself. I didn't have to take care of anybody but myself. So, hey, I'll just go off tomorrow. So there's certain psychology that if your character is the only child or the youngest child or the oldest child or the middle child, that your character wouldn't do. It is out of character. So the position in the family becomes very important. The family's economic and educational, economic and education is also important in terms of what is within the realm of your character. To make a credible character, you need to know this information so that your reader isn't saying to you, and maybe you have read books or stories or something, this doesn't even sound true. This is bogus. Given this person's education or geographic location or position in the family, they wouldn't do this. So you need to know. What's the character's relationship with their mother? 6. Good, bad, indifferent. I don't know. What's the character's relationship with their father? Good, bad, indifferent? I don't know. 8. Character's relationship with their siblings and other relatives. My character's an only child. I haven't dealt with only children before. So I'm really dealing with this guy. I'm trying to figure out what his life has been like. 9, what thoughts preoccupy him or her? Even the dumbest person, something preoccupies them. Even if they obsess on the red carpet, I don't know. But that's your job as a writer, to figure that out. What preoccupies your character? Worst dream. And here again, I'm talking both literally and metaphorically. Worst dream in terms of a nightmare or the worst thing that could happen to them. 11, bedtime and morning time rituals. I wake up pretty cheerful in the mornings, but that's from my perspective. My son, like, oh God, it's hard getting him up. He is not a morning person, you know? I have to go in his room 3 times and knock him up. This kid is in high school. I said, you're going to be in college at the end of the year. Who's going to do this for you? So what's the ritual? How hard is it to get up in the mornings? Or, you know, do you go to the first thing you do? Do you go to the bathroom and brush your teeth and wash your face? Do you go to the kitchen and have a cup of coffee? Do you exercise? What is the ritual? 12, attitude about their body and health. I'm going to go a little quicker. 13, the most daring acts. This is just my thing, right? There are different writers. I mean, and you could find in books about writing, there are different people who have created lists about characters and knowing characters. You can create your own list. I have found this to be useful. 13, the most daring act he has performed or contemplated. We've all contemplated things or we've done daring things. 14, religion or spiritual practice, religious or spiritual practice. This is Brazil. Brazil is a Catholic country. It is also candomblé, particularly Bahia, where I was. This person, given his social position, he's a legally a Catholic, but he also practices candomblé. I had to go to a candomblé ritual. 15, a shame or secret the character is guarding. Every one of us have one of these, you know, and it's only a shame because we don't want to share it. You know, so it's something you did, maybe big or small. 16, how does character stand, sit, and or sleep? Does they grit, you know, does a person grit their teeth? Each of us have our own unique way. You, in terms of talking about your character, need to be aware of your character. How do they stand? You know, a lot of times I tend to stand like this. So if I was writing a character about a character, you know, I want to know how they stand. How they sit, what they do. 2 top fears. What are my 2 top fears? Oh gosh, I won't tell you. 18. Who do they admire or would they, or would if they had to select a heroine or a hero? Political or social orientation. What type of music does he listen to in Bahia? I've got to know what kind of music, because music is everywhere. So that's just one thing about creating memorable characters and writing. I think I wanted to read one other little part and then turn it over to questions and answers. Certain images and people keep appearing to me inside my head and mind, and they refuse to go away. Again, talking about character, talking about creative fiction, and I know I should talk a little bit. I haven't taught composition in years, but I used to teach composition, and I think I was fairly good at it. And I know that for some of you, that's what you're doing, and so maybe I should talk more about those kinds of stuff, and maybe you'll have questions that will awaken that kind of mindset for me. But it's been, I've been focusing on the creative, and so much of this is about the creative. So I'm talking about how do you invite characters or people into your life as a writer. How do you sit with them? As I said, one of the activities I give my student is to go to a public place and to eavesdrop and to create, to see someone, and from that real person that they see and describe, to give a story to them, you know, to create a story for them. But I also believe that as human beings, there are characters who we invite into our lives, and it is those characters who we invite into our lives who we write about. So for instance, in my novel, It Begins with Tears, people say to me, because it's set in Jamaica, are these real people I know? And whereas I could say 3 of the 12 characters are based on real people I know, composites of real people I know, in fact, I didn't know these other characters until I wrote them. But having written them, then I know they exist. You know, I can't say they lived here or there or when, but I know that they exist. So I'm talking about inviting people into your life. I sometimes pretend as if, so I'm saying I don't remember inviting them in, but they show up at my door, knock loudly, and will not be turned back. I sometimes pretend as if I'm not home, hide out inside my own head. It is like glancing someone in the street you want to avoid, so you turn inside a store or appear to be deeply absorbed by the window display, bind in time until you hope the person you're avoiding has passed. But just as you turn around, letting out your breath, you find a person directly in front of you, so you fake a smile, you allow yourself to be engaged by small talk, or you mumble apologies about how much in a hurry you are, and you hope they will allow you to escape. However, everywhere you turn, they are there. The people I write about quickly become my friends, some of whom I like and care about deeply, and some I am just annoyed by, impatient with, want them to just go and sit down and figure out something before coming back to me. Some of the characters do take my advice and go off and then reappear again, and I'm often surprised by what they've learned, because sometimes it is the very thing I don't want to learn or hear. Notions of forgiveness, endurance, long-suffering, compassion. And I just, in Brazil, finished this story, which is called Trio, which is part of a short story collection that I'm hoping to finish next month. And it's based on a story I heard actually about 5 years ago, and I didn't think I wanted to write this story. And initially I was very judgmental about this woman and this affair she had, and didn't think when I wrote the story that I was going to be sympathetic towards her. You know, and I wrote the story and I learned so much about compassion and love that I didn't know. And in writing the story, I came to like this woman because I understood that what she did wasn't malicious. And for me, that is also, I find as a writer, and I don't know if this is true for all writers, is that oftentimes I write about things that I need to learn, you know, things that I'm grappling with, things that I'm judgmental about from a distance. And in writing about it, I find that I have to take a different perspective. Now, it's not that I always agree with the characters I write about. You know, some of the characters do abominable things that I wouldn't even think about doing. But, you know, it's their story, and so I tell those too. Okay, questions? Surely somebody has a question for me. Yes?
I wondered if you could talk a bit about writing poetry.
Oh, okay. What can I talk about writing poetry? Poetry is my first love. And in fact, when I went to when I went to graduate school, I did poetry because I didn't think I could write fiction. And I experiment in writing poetic forms. So, you know, I'll experiment in writing the sonnet. I write haikus and cinquain primarily as practice. My poetry is pretty much free form, but I find that the discipline of forcing to write in one of those forms helped my craft. To a certain extent, I think poetry is much more personal, if that says it, and has a stronger emotional impulse. And it's going with the feeling, you know, and I'm being vague because I'm not quite sure what it is you're asking me in terms of, you know, can I speak about writing, on poetry. I write poetry. When I teach a class on poetry, I have students experiment with a lot of different forms and a lot of different types of poems. The forms that I like and that I'm most familiar with, although ultimately students, when they turn in their manuscript, it can be, it doesn't have to be in a particular form. But what I've found for my own craft, that by forcing myself to do a iambic pentameter, you know, or to do a cinquain, or to do a haiku or a tankas, it just really helps me to hone and to cut away some of the excess, because I'm really a storyteller at heart, and all of my poems are about storytelling. And so sometimes there's a lot more excessive language than I need, and I'm getting better at being taking out the fluff. And it's the irony is that poetry is about the fluff, but in the language of it, you remove the excess and you just get to the bone of it. Lucille Clifton is a writer whose work I really love, and part of the reason why I love her work is because she is a writer to me who has gotten rid of the excess. Her poems are enormously clean and enormously precise, and sometimes even pristine and lovely. And I don't necessarily think my poems are there. My poems are different kinds of poems, but I like her work. I love Pablo Neruda. He's been one of my favorite poets for a long time, not only because of his range, because of his passion, and again because of his eyes. He has the most casual and yet the most amazingly detailed and unorthodox eye. And I think that's what as a poet brings is that particular eye to the word, to the expressing of the ideas. Yes.
Do you ever find yourself in a war between, on the one hand, not wanting to explain too much, but then on the other hand, thinking the reader will not get it?
Yeah, and that's always the difficulty. And for me, it's a double difficulty because oftentimes I'm writing about Jamaica specifically, and I'm writing to an American audience. So what is it that they know and what it is that they don't know? But outside of that, and for me, it's not so much a worry with poetry. For me, you get it or you don't, and it's not that important in poetry for me, because what I think you're going to get is the kind of emotional movement of it. In fiction, that becomes a much more balanced. It's the rope that I'm walking becomes a little bit more difficult to navigate, because because it's a fuller form, I do want people to get it. But what I have found, for me, the works that I like as a reader are those works that don't tell me everything. That allow me, some people say to me, I don't like such and such a writer because I have to work too hard. I like those writers. Because I want to work. I don't want it easy and upfront. That's just the kind of person I am. So my work has that there are those places where you could slip in a ditch as a reader. You thought, oh, where am I? And you crawl out. And I know for me it's okay if you think, well, I missed something while I was in this ditch, falling out. Because you got something anyway, you got the experience of falling in the ditch. So that's a really difficult balance, and part of how you'll determine that is because of the kind of reader you are. How much information do you want to get? But I think writing should give you enough to keep you going, but it should withhold a little bit.
Wouldn't that depend basically on the message that the writer wants to portray or express? Because I write,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a lot of things that I've written, and there are a lot of things that are straightforward for me from my understanding. But I don't want the reader to have my understanding. I want them to have their own understanding of what I'm writing about, to make it more personal and more effective for them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the case of what you're talking
I
about?
think it has to do with the genre or the subject matter. That there's some subject matters where you might want to be, not maybe didactic is not the word, but you want to be more straightforward. You want to make sure they get the point and they don't miss it. And there's some other works where you want them to get it, but as you say, you want them to know what you're thinking, but you don't necessarily want to knock them over the head. So it's a balance depending on what it is you're writing.
I don't want to keep it up. But like a lot of some of my things that I have been told that they're kind of strong in their meaning and in the kind of picture what I'm trying to express or reflect through my writing. And I've been told that I might be better off or more effective if I tone down some of the things that I'm speaking on. But from my perspective, if I do that, it's taken away from what I actually want to portray. I want it to be felt a certain way or viewed a certain way. So how do you grapple with those situations?
Again, it depends on the subject. You know, oftentimes if people say that your writing is strong, it probably has to do with the politics and what it is you're saying politically. And there's no way to get around that. Political writing is oftentimes strong, often didactic in terms of people have a specific point and they want to make sure that point gets said, and that's it. And people either accept that or they don't. So in those kinds of writing, if that's your intention, then you just go with that, knowing that certain people will probably not read it or will dismiss it as being propaganda and all of those stuff, and other people will. You have to decide depending on, you know, what is it you're writing for and who your audience is. Okay.
So sometimes you say to balance, sometimes you want to send a message and you don't want to say anything, you prefer that people interpret it all the time. Sometimes you just do straightforward and just carry on. It depends on the subject.
It really depends on the subject and who you think your audience is, what it is you think. You want people to read your work. So what can you say and get away with without turning off a lot of people and still get your message across? You know, so that's what you have to look at.
Okay, I want to thank you for coming. A couple things I want to mention. Opal will be doing a storytelling session. It's on the blue flyers around in half an hour right here. So if you want to come back and hear some Jamaican stories, I'm in.
Or African American.
Come back. And also, they're taping KSR, the West Valley Public Access TV station, has taped this. And they'll be showing it in a week or two, so you can look for that. I'll try to put up some notices, or you can check your TV. So thanks again for coming, and maybe see you at 12:30 here for the